What if a single painting could survive every fire, untouched by the flames that destroy everything else? This is the legend of the Crying Boy, a portrait feared for decades, whispered to carry a deadly curse. And tonight, we dig up the truth in the graveyard of secrets. In a quiet town in northern England during the 1980s, a small house burned to the ground. Among the ash and charred remains, firefighters found something unsettling: a painting of a young boy, tears streaking down his face, perfectly intact, untouched by the flames. The family claimed the painting had always hung in their living room. Neighbors whispered, "It's cursed." Weeks later, another fire erupted, different family, different city. The same painting survived again, unharmed, while everything else reduced to ash. Local newspapers began connecting the dots. The headline read, "The Crying Boy Survives Another Blaze." By the end of the year, dozens of fires had been reported with the same eerie detail. Firefighters themselves, skeptical at first, started refusing to have the painting in their homes. The story spread. Who is this boy? Why does his face appear wherever tragedy strikes? Investigators dug deeper. The painting was traced back to an Italian artist named Giovanni Bragolin, who supposedly painted orphans after World War II. Rumors said one of his favorite models, a boy named Don Bonillo, had watched his parents die in a house fire. Afterward, wherever Don went, fires seemed to follow. He was called Diablo, the devil. Don Bonillo reportedly vanished in Spain years later. Some say he died in a car crash that exploded into flames. Others say he simply disappeared, leaving behind only the haunting portrait. Superstition turned into fear. As tabloids ran wild, people began throwing out or even burning the paintings themselves. Yet, every time someone tried to destroy one, it refused to burn, or the fire spread to the house instead. Fire stations received floods of calls from terrified owners begging them to take the paintings away. In a dramatic move, a popular newspaper urged readers to bring in their Crying Boy paintings to be burned in a mass bonfire. Hundreds of people showed up. When the fire was lit, the paintings crackled and smoked but stubbornly refused to fully ignite. The legend only grew stronger. Experts tried to calm the hysteria. They claimed the paintings were printed on heat-resistant cardboard with a fire-retardant varnish, which explained why they survived blazes. But believers countered, if that's true, why do so many homes with a painting catch fire in the first place? One family, convinced the curse was nonsense, kept their painting. A month later, their home mysteriously burned down in the middle of the night. Firefighters again found the portrait, flawless, untouched, as if mocking the charred remains of everything else. To this day, copies of the Crying Boy still surface at flea markets, online auctions, and estate sales. Some people hang them up as conversation pieces, daring fate. Others refuse to even touch them. Whether curse or coincidence, one thing is certain: the Crying Boy still cries, and maybe still burns. It was a quiet autumn evening in a small town outside Sheffield, England, in 1985. The Williams family had just finished dinner when the faint scent of smoke drifted through the hallway. Within minutes, the entire downstairs erupted into flames, roaring with an intensity no one could explain. Neighbors rushed out into the street as fire engines screamed toward the house. By the time firefighters got the blaze under control, everything the family owned, furniture, photographs, keepsakes, had been reduced to blackened rubble. But amid the destruction, something strange was found lying face up on the floorboards. A painting. A simple print of a young boy with tears glistening on his cheeks. Firefighters were baffled. Nothing in the room had survived. Not a scrap of carpet, not a beam of wood, not a book from the shelves. Yet this painting of a crying child was completely untouched, its colors bright as if it had been hung only yesterday. The varnish didn't bubble. The frame didn't char. It was as if the fire had ignored it completely. When reporters arrived, they photographed the painting, and the image made its way to the local papers, where it was dismissed as a coincidence, a strange one, but nothing more. But the family swore it wasn't a coincidence. They told neighbors the painting had always given them an odd feeling, as though the boy's glassy eyes followed them around the room. Mr. Williams even admitted that he tried to take it down once, only for it to fall face up onto the floor, the same way firefighters found it after the blaze. When he picked it up, the tears on the boy's face seemed almost fresh, glistening in the dim light. A week later, their house was ash. The townspeople began to murmur, "That painting, it's cursed!" Whispers turned into full-blown rumors. Firefighters themselves began talking in the station about that crying boy painting that wouldn't burn. The unease spread quickly through the small community, with some insisting they'd seen the painting in other homes that later caught fire. Still, no one believed it was anything more than bad luck. But this was only the beginning. The next fire would make sure everyone started paying attention. Just a few weeks later, and more than 50 miles away, another fire broke out, this time in a family home in Rotherham. The blaze was ferocious, gutting the entire ground floor before firefighters could bring it under control. As they sifted through the remains, they stumbled upon a sight that stopped them cold, another painting of a tear-streaked boy, completely untouched. The wallpaper around it was blackened, the table it leaned against had collapsed into ash, yet the portrait looked pristine, as though it had been painted that very morning. The firefighters who responded to this second blaze were different from those at the first, yet they, too, were unsettled. When the painting was shown to them, one muttered, "I've seen this before, in the paper about that Sheffield fire." Reporters rushed to cover the story, printing headlines like, "Crying Boy Survives Another Blaze." The coincidence was too eerie to ignore. Residents who owned similar paintings started to feel a creeping sense of dread, wondering if their homes might be next. Calls began flooding local fire stations from anxious citizens. One woman swore her painting gave off a strange heat whenever she walked by. Another claimed her dog barked furiously whenever it entered the room where the portrait hung. By now, photographs of the crying boy were circulating widely, and people were realizing just how many households had copies. It wasn't rare at all. Hundreds, maybe thousands, hung in living rooms across Britain. Even hardened firefighters, usually quick to dismiss superstition, started to take notice. "We're not saying it's cursed," one officer told a journalist, "but every time I see that picture, something burns." The pattern was undeniable. Different towns, different families, but always the same weeping child staring out from the flames. And this was only the second case, the beginning of a chain of incidents that would soon grip the entire nation with fear. By the end of that year, the crying boy had become more than a disturbing coincidence. It was turning into a national obsession. Reports of similar fires trickled in from different counties: Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool. In every case, the cause of the blaze remained unexplained, and in every case, the painting was found among the wreckage without a single scorch mark. The tabloids seized the story, splashing the boy's haunting face across their front pages. The image became impossible to avoid, staring from newsstands, glaring from television broadcasts, etched into the public consciousness. Neighbors began pointing fingers at one another. If someone had the painting hanging in their living room, whispers followed them down the street. "That's the cursed house." Families quietly took their portraits down, but few dared destroy them. Strange stories circulated. A man claimed he tried to burn his copy, but it wouldn't ignite. A woman swore that when she threw hers out, she heard the sound of a child crying outside her window at midnight. Fear was spreading faster than any fire. Even people who didn't believe in curses found themselves uneasy. Firefighters, hardened by years of tragedy, began to privately warn friends and relatives to remove the painting. just in case. The fear became so widespread that newspapers received hundreds of letters from readers, some begging for help, others swearing they'd had near misses with disaster. A few claimed they'd had dreams of the boy coming to life, silently pointing to smoke rising from their own homes. The painting was no longer just an oddity. It was becoming folklore in real time. Superstition tangled with paranoia until even skeptics started second-guessing themselves. What was once an inexpensive decoration sold in high-street shops had now taken on an aura of pure menace. And people began asking the question no one wanted to answer: who is the boy in the painting, and why does tragedy seem to follow him? As journalists dug deeper, they traced the painting back to an Italian artist named Giovanni Bragolin, sometimes called the painter of crying children. Bragolin had produced dozens of similar portraits in the 1950s and 1960s, all of them showing young boys and girls with tear-streaked faces. They were mass-produced prints sold cheaply throughout Europe, which explained why so many British households owned one. But when investigators tried to find out more about the child who appeared in the most infamous painting, the little boy with dark hair and haunting eyes, they stumbled on rumors that made the blood run cold. According to whispered accounts in Spanish and Italian villages, the boy's name was Don Bonillo, an orphan whose parents had perished in a terrible house fire. Locals claimed that after the tragedy, strange fires seemed to follow wherever Don went. Barns, workshops, even a schoolhouse were said to have gone up in flames shortly after his arrival. Some began calling him El Diablo, the devil's child, believing he was cursed or possessed. Bragolin, fascinated by the child's sad, hollow look, allegedly paid him to sit for several portraits, including the one that would later become infamous as the crying boy. The artist himself lived in fear. A few sources suggested that Bragolin confessed to friends he regretted ever painting the child, claiming, "Something was wrong with that boy." Others swore they'd heard Bragolin mutter that Don's gaze carried a terrible weight, as though the boy knew fires would consume everything he touched. Whether these stories were true or twisted by gossip, they added a sinister layer to the mystery. The boy in the painting wasn't just a model. He was rumored to be a walking omen. When British reporters pieced together these accounts, they published them with sensational headlines. "Cursed boy behind doomed painting." Instead of calming fears, this revelation sent them into overdrive. People now believed they weren't just dealing with an unlucky decoration. They were hanging the face of a cursed child in their own living rooms. And if the stories about Don Bonillo were true, the tragedy surrounding him was far from over. As the legend of Don Bonillo spread, journalists tried to track down records of the mysterious orphan. They found scattered reports placing him at various foster homes and workhouses in Spain during the late 1950s. In each place he stayed, there were whispers of unexplained blazes, a hay barn reduced to ash, a mechanic's shop gutted overnight, even a roadside and destroyed, while guests barely escaped. Officials wrote these events off as accidents, but locals swore the fires always began after the boy arrived. Then, in the early 1960s, Don Bonillo vanished from all public record. No school enrollment. No adoption paperwork. No death certificate. It was as if the child had been erased. Some villagers claimed to have seen him hitchhiking on dusty rural roads, his sad eyes and soot-smudged clothes unmistakable. Others insisted he fled Spain entirely, moving through France and into Italy, where Bragolin supposedly continued to paint him. Yet no one could say for sure where he lived, or even if he lived at all. It was as though he appeared only in fleeting glimpses, always near the scene of some misfortune, only to disappear again, like smoke after a fire. Years later, a chilling rumor emerged. A young man, believed to be Don Bonillo, reportedly died in a fiery car crash on a winding road near Malaga. Witnesses claimed the vehicle exploded into an inferno on impact, burning so hot the metal frame warped. When authorities combed through the wreckage, they never found a clear trace of who the victim truly was. Some said this proved the cursed child had finally perished in flames, just as everyone predicted. Others whispered he had somehow survived once again, leaving nothing but scorched earth behind. For many, this disappearance only deepened the mystery. If Don Bonillo had truly died, why did fires linked to his portrait continue to occur decades later in countries far from Spain? If he had survived, what became of him? And most unsettling of all, could his sorrowful gaze somehow live on inside the mass-produced paintings, carrying his curse to any home reckless enough to hang one on its wall? By the mid-1980s, the legend of the crying boy had spread far beyond a handful of mysterious fires. British tabloids ran headline after headline warning homeowners about the cursed painting. Suddenly, ordinary families were tearing their living rooms apart, yanking the portrait off walls and throwing it into gardens, alleyways, or rubbish bins. Yet even as people tried to rid themselves of it, others swore the paintings always seemed to come back. Neighbors reported finding copies lying against their doors, left behind, as if no one dared touch them for long. Callers overwhelmed radio shows with breathless stories. One woman claimed her gas stove exploded the very day she tried to burn her crying boy print. Another said her wallpaper mysteriously ignited moments after she removed the frame from its hook. Fire stations began receiving dozens of calls daily from frightened residents pleading with them to take it away before something happens. Even hardened officers, who normally dismiss such hysteria, admitted they'd seen too many cases where the painting turned up in the ashes of burned homes to feel entirely comfortable. The fear reached such a fever pitch that local councils had to make public statements begging people to stay calm. Furniture shops reported a bizarre phenomenon. Customers who owned the painting wanted nothing more than to get rid of it, while curious thrill-seekers were trying to buy one, eager to test the curse. Some antique dealers even locked their doors at night, worried that vandals or desperate owners might break in just to dump their copies in the shop. The once innocent mass-produced print had become Britain's most feared household item. People no longer joked about coincidence. They treated the painting as if it were alive, an object with its own will, carrying the sorrow, and perhaps the curse, of the mysterious boy it depicted. But fear alone wasn't enough to stop the growing hysteria. Soon, a major newspaper would stage an unprecedented public event to deal with the cursed artwork once and for all, an event that only added fuel to the fire. As panic spiraled out of control, the Sun newspaper decided to take drastic action. In bold letters, it urged readers to send us your crying boy paintings. We'll destroy them before they destroy you. The offer spread like wildfire. Within days, hundreds of frightened families mailed or delivered their portraits, packing the newsroom with stacks of weeping children staring from identical frames. Reporters arranged a massive bonfire on the edge of town, inviting witnesses and even firefighters to see the curse burned out of existence once and for all. On the chosen day, the air was sharp with autumn wind as the crowd gathered around the towering pile of portraits. Families came clutching their copies as if they were handing over weapons. Some arrived in tears, recalling strange accidents or near misses that had shaken their faith in mere coincidence. Even hardened skeptics stood at the edge of the field, curious to see if the so-called curse would end in smoke and ash. When the flames were lit, cheers erupted, but they quickly turned to silence. As the bonfire roared, the edges of the paintings curled and blackened, yet many refused to ignite completely. Reporters swore the varnished prints slid off the burning pile as if resisting the fire. A few frames fell out intact, their sad-eyed children staring up through the smoke, untouched by the inferno that should have devoured them. Spectators whispered nervously, some stepping back from the heat. The fire brigade, watching closely, admitted it was unusual. Most cheap prints should have burned instantly. The sight fed the legend rather than silenced it. In the aftermath, the newspaper declared victory, claiming the curse had been defeated, but no one truly believed it. Too many paintings remained uncollected in people's homes, and new stories of unexplained fires kept surfacing. If anything, the public burning gave the legend more power. People now said the crying boy didn't want to be destroyed. And while some homeowners felt safe after parting with their portraits, others wondered if they'd only made the mysterious child angrier. In the wake of the mass bonfire, experts scrambled to calm the frenzy. Chemists, art restorers, and even fire investigators stepped forward to explain why the paintings survived flames. According to them, the crying boy was not cursed at all. The prints had been sealed with a heat-resistant varnish and mounted on hardboard treated with fire-retardant chemicals. This, they said, prevented them from burning easily, even in an intense blaze. "It's science, not sorcery," one investigator told the press. "These pictures survive because they're manufactured to do so." But not everyone was convinced. If the prints were truly fire-resistant, why were so many homes with the painting mysteriously catching fire in the first place? Skeptics pointed out that the varnish explanation only covered why the paintings didn't burn, not why they were always there when disaster struck. The theory satisfied no one. Even people who wanted to believe in a logical cause felt uneasy, as though something deeper and darker was being ignored. Some homeowners reported chilling coincidences that varnish alone couldn't explain. One man swore his painting fell from the wall seconds before his kitchen caught fire. Another claimed she heard faint sobbing in her hallway, only to discover moments later that smoke was pouring from her living room. Stories like these fed a growing belief that the curse was real, no matter what scientists said. The rational voices were drowned out by the steady drumbeat of fear. Newspapers that had tried to debunk the legend found themselves backtracking as sales surged whenever they published stories of mysterious fires. Even fire brigades, who publicly dismissed the curse, quietly admitted they avoided taking the prints home. People began to wonder, was the varnish explanation just an easy cover story? And if so, what force was really hiding behind the eyes of that Tear Street child? In the late 1980s, long after the panic was supposed to have died down, one family in a small Yorkshire village made headlines. The Harrisons had heard all the stories about the crying boy but dismissed them as nonsense. They even joked about the so-called curse when friends urged them to take the painting down. "It's just a picture," Mr. Harrison laughed, tapping the frame in the hallway. "Paintings don't start fires." His confidence would soon turn to horror. Late one evening, while the family slept, a sudden blaze erupted in the living room. The flames spread quickly, feeding on furniture and curtains, crackling through the wooden beams with terrifying speed. By the time neighbors noticed the smoke and called emergency services, the house was fully engulfed. Firefighters managed to pull the Harrisons to safety, but the home itself was completely destroyed. In the charred wreckage, one object lay on the floor, untouched by heat or soot, the same haunting portrait of a Tear Street boy. Investigators combed through the debris for clues. No faulty wiring. No candles left burning. No evidence of arson. "We can't explain how this started," the fire chief admitted grimly. Yet when he held up the painting, perfectly preserved amid the destruction, his words faltered. Even those who swore they didn't believe in curses whispered about the eerie coincidence. The photograph of that unscathed portrait appeared in national newspapers within days, reigniting public fear. This incident became the most infamous case linked to the crying boy. For many, it confirmed what they already believed, that the painting carried something sinister, something beyond human understanding. And as word spread, the legend grew darker still, setting the stage for the question no one dared ask aloud. If the curse couldn't be burned away, could it ever truly be stopped? Even decades later, the crying boy refuses to fade into obscurity. Copies of the painting still turn up in flea markets, antique shops, and online auctions, often sold with a nervous laugh and a warning. "Hang it if you dare!" Some buyers seek it out intentionally, curious to test the curse, while others stumble across it unknowingly, unaware of the stories surrounding its tear-streaked face. Wherever it appears, the painting still carries a reputation that makes even skeptics hesitate. In recent years, scattered reports of unexplained fires have once again been linked to the portrait. A family in Essex claimed their fireplace suddenly roared out of control the night they hung the picture. In Glasgow, a retired couple swore they smelled smoke moments after buying one at a car boot sale, only to discover their kitchen wiring sparking dangerously. Whether coincidence or something darker, the legend persists. Tragedy seems to shadow those who bring the crying child home. Collectors who dare to keep the painting describe strange experiences. Some say the boy's sad eyes seem to follow them through the room. Others hear faint sobbing late at night, with no source to be found. A few even report cold spots forming around the frame, as if the air itself resents its presence. Though modern skeptics dismiss these stories as imagination or hysteria, the unease is real, and it has kept the legend alive long after the headlines faded. Today, the crying boy is both an artifact and an omen, a piece of post-war pop art turned into a symbol of fear. Those who own it must decide, is it just a harmless decoration with a bad reputation, or is there truly something trapped in those painted tears, something that refuses to burn, refuses to be forgotten, and refuses to stop crying? The legend of the crying boy refuses to die, just like the paintings themselves. Firefighters who once dismissed it now admit they'd never hang one in their homes. Skeptics continue to insist it's nothing more than coincidence. Yet, decades later, the stories keep coming. Some say the boy's spirit still wanders, weeping over the flames that seem to follow him. Others believe he's warning us, not cursing us, and that the fires are merely his way of being heard. But no one knows for certain, and perhaps no one ever will. Somewhere tonight, another copy of the painting hangs quietly on a wall. A family laughs, unaware of the whispers that surround it. And maybe, just maybe, in the stillness of the night, if you listen closely, you'll hear a child crying. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some tears refuse to dry. What will you uncover next in the graveyard of secrets?